Today we're going to be doing our 2025 season preview for the Carolina Panthers. Before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new, and let's get into previewing the Panthers' upcoming season. So first, looking at their big additions and losses. Quick look here, they did a lot to improve their team. Starting off with their draft, which I think was a very successful draft. Starting off in the first round, you get Teteroya McMillan, T-Mac, out of Arizona to be your number one guy to go along with Liggett, who you took in the first round last year. You got Jimmy Horn late in the draft out of Colorado, super fast, speedy receiver. They kind of lacked that. And then you get two edge rushers, Nick Scorton and Princely Uman-Mielen. Scorton out of A&M, Uman-Mielen out of Ole Miss. I really like Scorton. I think a lot of people had first round grades on him. So to get him in the second, which they did, great value. And you saw he had a lot of production at Purdue when he was at a smaller weight. I know that's a whole discussion with him of what weight he's going to be, but I think he'll be a productive rookie nonetheless. And then Uman-Mielen, not as obviously good as Scorton, wasn't picked as high, but he still has that potential to be a very good pass rusher alongside Scorton. And these two, there's no real competition in terms of young pass rushers on this team, so they could easily be the top two pass rushers for years to come. And then at safety, they get Lathan Ransom out of Ohio State. I've heard mixed reviews on Lathan Ransom. Some people really like him, some people don't, so I guess it will just be a sort of wait and see for him. And then other free agency additions, they bring in Rico Dowdle to be backup to Chuba Hubbard, 1,000-yard rusher last year with Dallas. Main reason they did that is because Jonathan Brooks, unfortunately, is out for another season with a torn, I think his second torn ACL on the same leg. So hopefully he comes back. But they only signed Rico Dowdle to a one-year deal, I'm pretty sure. So even if Brooks comes back next year, you can just let Rico Dowdle go. But for now, him and Chuba can make a pretty decent running back duo. Not top of the league, but they're up there. And then they get two D tackles / D linemen in Bobby Brown and Tershawn Wharton, because they were the worst run defense in the league last year, and these are two very good run stuffers. They're both pretty young, I think, as well. They're 25, 26 years old. Tershawn Wharton had a career year in Kansas City last year, playing alongside Chris Jones, and Bobby Brown's just been a consistent guy early on in his career with the Rams. And then they bring in Trayvon Merrick, another sort of run-stopping player at the safety position. Not the best what I've heard at coverage. But when it comes to tackling in the box and stopping the run, he's had very good success with the Raiders. So they bring him in on a pretty decent contract. And then their losses, you lose Miles Sanders and you bring Rico Dowdle. I think that's an upgrade. You lose Jadeveon Clowney, they cut him. Now I think Clowney's better than Scorton and Uman-Mielen, but Clowney's on much older and they're rookies, so for future they're an upgrade. Shaq Thompson, a longtime veteran. They brought in Christian Roseboom from the Rams, a linebacker who I didn't put on this screen, but we'll talk about him later. Dane Jackson didn't do too much for them, honestly. They didn't really add any corners, but Dane Jackson wasn't that good for them. And then Jordan Fuller, I think Merrick and Ransom is an upgrade over Fuller. So I think overall, they had a decent amount of money to spend. They knew their weaknesses, which was run defense, and they got upgrades on that. And I think they had a very successful offseason. Now looking at the offense, obviously at quarterback you have Bryce Young. First overall pick, they traded a lot to get him. Did not have the best rookie season. I feel like people think it was a lot worse than it was. It was a below average rookie season. I wouldn't say it was terrible. I think you saw flashes. But then the first two games of this most recent season were just not good. They end up benching him for Andy Dalton, who then gets injured. Bryce Young comes back into the lineup, and he's like a completely different quarterback. I don't know what happened. If it was confidence, if it was the break, whatever. But he looked like a completely different quarterback, and he looked like the quarterback that they drafted that made them draft him number one overall. And down the stretch, the last 8 to 10 games, he not only looked like a good quarterback, he was playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the league if you look at certain stats and advanced stats. So he can carry, if Bryce can carry that success from last year into this season, I think this could be a very good offense for the Panthers, because at the back in your backfield, we mentioned Rico Dowdle, 1,000-yard rusher with Dallas. You bring him in as your backup running back. You have Chuba, who had a breakout year last year, another 1,000-plus rusher, had multiple game-winning touchdowns. And then you also have Trevor Etienne, he took in the 4th round out of Georgia. That's a decent 3-man backfield, 3-man running back room. And a big reason why that running game was so successful last year was this O-line. They spent heavy money on the O-line last year, and you saw it pay dividends when they brought in Hunt and Damian Lewis on top of Aquanu, Moton, and Austin Corbett. It was one of the better O-lines in the league, at least run blocking, maybe pass blocking. They were more in the average range, but they were a very good run blocking room, hence the breakout of a guy like Chuba Hubbard. Tight end room, it's not the best, probably one of the worst tight end rooms, but you have Tommy Tremble, who's been a decent player for them, nothing too special. You have Jatavian Sanders, who you took in the 4th round last year. He showed some flashes before he, I believe, got injured. And then they have Mitchell Evans, who they took out of Notre Dame. It's a decent 3 tight ends. Nothing special. Now, they were all drafted in like the last 5 years. So, or last 4 years, they've all been drafted. So they're pretty young. So that, something. And then the receiver room, I think, is what's most intriguing about this team, because there's just a lot of good players on this receiver room. You have McMillan, who we talked about earlier, the big frame, can move a lot, can move very well and separate very well for his size. You got him out of the 1st round of Arizona. You have Xavier Legette, who definitely had his struggles last year with some crucial drops against the Eagles mainly, but I still think you saw enough potential out of him that he can still be very good, because he was still making good catches before sort of that end of the year. You have Adam Thielen, who, despite being however old he is, 35, 34, he's still been very productive, especially on the Panthers. Obviously, he was better on Minnesota, but he's still been very productive on the Panthers. You have David Moore, who's just a veteran guy. Jalen Coker, the undrafted free agent rookie out of Holy Cross last year, surprised a lot of people, had a very good season. Did not see that coming from him. Jimmy Horn, as we mentioned, the very fast, elusive guy out of Colorado. And then they also brought in Hunter Renfrow, which is kind of fun that he's back in the league. We'll see if he can get a roster spot. But when he was healthy, like 2-3 years ago, you all know he was one of the best route runners in the league. So I think if Bryce Young can carry his success, his confidence, his trust in his team and himself from the end of last year into this season, combine that with a good run game, a good O-line, and a deep, good receiver room, I think this could be a very good, sneaky offense. Now, what might hold this team back, which definitely held it back last year, I don't think it will hold it back as much this year, is the defense. It was, I think, statistically the worst defense of all time in terms of like points allowed. I don't think it's going to be that bad, but it still isn't the best defense. It definitely is improved, mainly with Derrick Brown. And they didn't even have to do anything to bring in Derrick Brown. One of the better D tackles in the league. He was out for the entire season last year, so just getting him back healthy is a massive addition just alone, especially in the run game, which was their biggest weakness last year on defense. Then you bring in Bobby Brown, you bring in Tershawn Wharton, 2 D linemen known for their run defense, on top of Derrick Brown. A'Shawn Robinson's not a bad depth piece. They also drafted Cam Jackson out of Florida in the 5th. Then on the sort of linebacker aspect, you have your 2 pass rushing linebackers, because they have a 3-4, in Patrick Jones and DJ Wanham as your main starters. They picked up Patrick Jones out of free agency. He's been an okay player out of Minnesota in terms of like production, like numbers he's put up. He's been decent in Minnesota, nothing crazy. And then DJ Wanham, another guy who they brought in from Minnesota, similar to Patrick Jones. He's just been a decent player. But then you have your 2 rookies backing them up in Uman Mielen and Scorton, who could easily take over those spots of those two guys, because I don't think they're investing heavy money in Wanham or Patrick Jones. And then the linebacker core, definitely to be desired a little bit. I think the top two guys in Josie Jewell and Trevin Wallace aren't bad. Josie Jewell has been a very good linebacker for multiple years now. Originally with Denver, signed with the Panthers last year, had a very good season. And then Trevin Wallace, their third-round pick out of Kentucky. You definitely saw some flashes out of Trevin Wallace. It wasn't, the cleanest rookie season, but you saw flashes that he could turn into and eventually become a decent player. And then Roseboom, who they picked up from the Rams. So it's not the best linebacker room, but definitely not horrible. And then their secondary, you obviously have J.C. Horn, the best player on the secondary, one of the best players on the team. They paid him a big extension, I think it's 5 years, $100 million, which at the time made him the highest paid corner, but now I think Stingley passed him. But whenever a really good player at a certain position gets paid, they're going to be the highest at that position, but more likely than not. And then when the next player gets paid, like Stingley, then that player will be the highest paid. So I don't really look into he's the highest paid corner, second highest paid corner. He's just one of the highest paid corners, and I think it's deserved because he's one of the better corners. When healthy, though, that is the skepticism, is his health. He's missed like half of the games of. He's only played like half of the potential games he could have played so far in his career. But you see when he is healthy how good of a player he can be, and that he can shut down top receivers. And then outside of him, you have Mike Jackson, who they traded for last year. Fine corner. He does get beat a little bit here and there, but he can still make plays as a sort of veteran corner. Shao Smith-Wade, their fifth-round pick from last year. I like Shao Smith-Wade. I think he could have a decent season as their third corner. They kind of need him because outside of him, you have Caleb Evans, Shamar Bartholomew, and MJ Devonshire. I've heard of mainly Caleb Evans, but I don't know too much about those three guys, so you kind of need Shao Smith-Wade to step up. And then the safety room, I mean, we talked about Traven Merrick. Yes, he may have his inconsistencies when it comes to pass coverage, but he can still be a very good run stopper. And then outside of that, you got a three-man room of Ransom, Damani Richardson, and Nick Scott. Nick Scott, just a veteran guy who's played for a few teams here and there. Lathan Ransom, their fourth-round pick from Ohio State, which we talked about. Some people are really high on him, some people not so much. And then Damani Richardson, who I believe was an unrestricted free agent as well. I'm not sure, though, who came in for the Panthers last year. And he also showed similar flashes, similar to what Shao Smith-Wade did. And I think they're going to really need those two guys to step up. I like, as I've said here, I like their starting secondary, like their top guys, like Mike Jackson, Merrick, Richardson, Horn, Wade. But they don't have a lot of depth there, and that's their big issue. Now, there are a lot of, or not a lot, but there's top defensive backs available with like Ramsey and Alexander. I don't think they'll go to the Panthers. I think they want to go to a clear contender. While I think the Panthers could surprise people with some wins, I don't know if they're not really at that contender category yet. So I don't think they'll be able to land those guys. So I think the depth issues of the secondary could be an issue. But I like the starting unit all around the field. I don't think it's going to be the worst defense in the league. I think they will still be maybe towards the bottom, maybe in like the 20s, the low 20s, high 10s, like in the 18 to 23 range for their defense. But I think, as I mentioned before, their offense could be up there if Bryce Young can carry over that success we saw at the end of last year. Quick look at their special teams. They overhauled their special teams. They brought in Matthew Wright to be their kicker. Not too familiar with Matthew Wright. I think if he's just been a fine kicker, but they did pick up Ryan Fitzgerald out of, I believe, Florida State at an undrafted free agency this year. And I really like Ryan Fitzgerald. I think he could eventually take the spot. And then Sam Martin, they brought him in to be their punter, another just veteran guy. But one thing I really like about the special teams is the addition of Jimmy Horn. I talked a little bit about how Jimmy Horn is that speed threat in that receiver room that they don't really have with their other top guys. He really brings that juice to that receiver room. And I do think he will be a very viable receiver for them. But early on in his career, I think he'll find his value most in the return game as a punt and kick returner, and then he can eventually become an actual receiver for them consistently. So I like that addition in the special teams room. So I think overall this team, I think it could be a very decent team in a weak NFC South. I think they could compete for some wins. I think it really just depends on how Bryce Young can translate that success and how this defense can hold up. But their schedule isn't nothing crazy, to be honest. Like, they have a pretty easy schedule, all things considered. I don't know exactly. I'll quickly look up where they rank amongst win percentage. I don't really like win percentage as like a full measurement of how difficult or easy a team's schedule is, because that's ranked by the win percentage of every team last year. But teams make additions and changes, and so it's not really a full like how hard their schedule is. But based on last year's win percentage, they have the 5th easiest schedule. So I think based on their schedule, they could actually get a decent amount of wins and compete for the NFC South. So let's now go over their floor, ceiling, and prediction. I think if you look at their floor games that are 50-50 or games they could win, I think you look at the Saints, they could get at least a game out the Saints. I think they can at least get a game out the Falcons, maybe even 2 games versus the Saints. I think they could beat the Cardinals. They've had a good track record versus them. And then maybe if you throw one of Patriots, Jets, Jags in there, I think they could have a floor of about 5 wins. Beating the Saints twice, getting a win versus the Falcons, and then beating 2 of Patriots, Cardinals, Jags, Jets. I think that's a solid floor for them. But with how tight the NFC South is, maybe they get a win versus the Bucs. Maybe they beat a team like the Dolphins. Maybe they get 2 wins versus the Falcons. And maybe instead of just getting 2 of Jags, Cardinals, Patriots, Jets, maybe they get all 4 of those games. So I think at best, like their ceiling is about 10 wins. I think they have the chance with how easy the schedule is, because you saw them compete with the Eagles, compete with the Chiefs. They won, I think, 2 of their last 3 games when Bryce Young was putting it all together. So if he has that type of performance over the course of an entire season with an easy schedule, they could end up in that 10-win range, or he may not translate fully yet, or it takes them a while to translate, or maybe the defense is still not quite there and they get more towards the 5-win range. So my final prediction for them is 7-10, maybe 8 wins, but it's either 8-10 or 8-7, and I went on the 7-win side just because, mainly honestly because the defense. I think that defense could be a little up and down. They have like star talent, but they don't have a lot of overall talent on the defense. But that will conclude our quick little preview for the Panthers 2025 season. Let me know some of your thoughts on the Panthers season. If you enjoyed this video and other videos, make sure to leave a like. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on more content and our other previews, make sure to subscribe, turn the notification bell on so you're notified when a new video comes out. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.